Good evening and welcome to Biz RoundUp. I'm Tamiru Nimsat and we at our television bring you a collection of business highlights. Let's have a look at the headlines. World Bank warns Sri Lanka's economic recovery remains fragile. Build long-term competitiveness, World Bank tells Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka secures critical IMF funding after successful fifth review. News in detail. World Bank says that Sri Lanka's recent economic performance has been strong but needs to manage the public wage bill, including fairer pay structures and modern payroll systems. At the same time, World Bank also warns that the recovery remains incomplete, with growth still below pre-crisis levels and poverty significantly elevated.
Released today, the latest Sri Lanka development update titled as Better Spending for All projects Sri Lanka's economy to grow by 4.6% in 2025. Although recent growth is strong, inflation low and external inflows robust, food prices have remained high and reserve accumulation has slowed. The statement further says that Sri Lanka's economic output is still below 2018 levels and the labour market has been slow to recover and many households have yet to regain livelihoods lost during the crisis. An additional 10% of the population lives just above the poverty line and malnutrition remains a serious issue, especially among vulnerable groups. Poverty, although declining, remains twice as high as in 2019. To support long-term growth and reduce poverty amid fiscal constraints, the report calls for a broad package of reforms aimed at enabling private sector-led growth. Key priorities including easing barriers to trade and investment, improving the business environment, and modernizing tax administration and regulations governing land and labor markets. The report also has a special focus on public spending and shows Sri Lanka has limited scope to significantly increase or cut public expenditure. It could instead focus on maximizing the benefits from its existing levels of public spending, especially on public wages and capital projects. Key recommendations include reforms to manage the public wage bill, including fairer pay structures and modern payroll systems. On public investment, the report urges the government to focus on key infrastructure gaps, implement stronger project planning, evaluation and monitoring processes, prioritizing the completion of nearly finished projects and increase funding for maintenance of infrastructure.
The World Bank outlines that Sri Lanka must push through to attract capital and revive exports and build long-term competitiveness, warning that export growth has slowed. Speaking to the media in Colombo, World Bank senior country economist for Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Richard Walker, said that foreign direct investment remains far too low to meet the country's growth objectives.
You can see this sort of slowing down of export growth. And the other point here you can see, maybe not so clearly, is the level of FDI, which really is hovering, stays around 0.5% of GDP over the next few years. And this is concerning for Sri Lanka in that at this stage it really needs to mobilize more investment, boost exports, and as well as to try and achieve this goal of $36 billion of exports by 2030. I think the first thing is policy consistency is key. And you see there, we've grouped this in two areas. So around the fiscal discipline and then maintaining sort of rebalancing fiscal policy. So that means spending better, and Shruti will come on to this later, spending better, more efficiently, but also being more progressive in the mobilization of tax revenue. So the first key area I'll just highlight there is around these tax administration reforms, so to continue the progress there. The second one is around developing a formal tax expenditure management framework, so really trying to be more transparent about this, ensure cost-benefit analysis is done when developing this. Continued enforcement of cost-reflective utility pricing is key for ensuring the financial viability of SOEs. And all of this really has to take account of trying to balance debt sustainability, growth and equity, which is going to be tricky going forward for government.
World Bank senior country economist for Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Richard Walker, also cautioned that monetary policy must remain well calibrated to control inflation and prevent excessive credit growth. He stressed that the government must maintain continued vigilance over financial sector risks, including high non-performing loans and the exposure of banks to government debt.
There has been a sort of softening of monetary policy, but the concern going forward, this has to continue to be well calibrated to mitigate against some inflationary pressures, as well as the sort of unsustainable build-up in private sector credit. And you've seen a very, very high and rapid growth in this credit over the last year or so. Financial sector risks need to be carefully monitored. This includes also the elevated levels of non-performing loans which you see, as well as this continued high exposure of the banking sector to government. The third point there around state-owned banks' governance and ownership, there has been good progress here. The emphasis is really in continuing these reforms, especially around the state-owned banks, to ensure that there's sort of sustained financial sector deepening, as they'll be critical for providing credit and supporting the growth of the economy. And you've already seen some of this increased liquidity among state-owned banks, which has helped drive some of this credit growth.
World Bank senior country economist Volcker, however, added that he was generally positive about the government's recent performance in stabilization, while emphasizing the need to continue with policy consistency.
We are generally, I would say, quite positive and happy about the performance of government in these areas, and I think the emphasis is to continue with this policy consistency. On the structural reforms, though, we are a little more concerned. I think these are really critical areas for longer-term growth, maintaining exchange rate flexibility. If there are any shocks, the exchange rate can help facilitate some of these external adjustments, and it's also important for continuing to rebuild reserves.
Stay tuned. We will return after this short commercial break. Welcome back after the break. The International Monetary Fund announces that it has reached a staff-level agreement on the fifth review under Sri Lanka's extended fund facility arrangement. Accordingly, IMF revealed that once the review is approved by the IMF Executive Board, Sri Lanka will have access to about $347 million in financing. An International Monetary Fund mission team led by Ivan Papageorgiou visited Sri Lanka from the 24th of September to 9th of October this year to discuss recent macroeconomic developments and progress in implementing economic and financial policies under the extended fund facility arrangement. At the end of the mission, the team said that IMF staff and the Sri Lankan authorities have reached staff-level agreement on the fifth review under the 4-year extended fund facility arrangement. The arrangement was approved by the IMF Executive Board for a total amount of $3 billion in March 2023.
So, we're here in Colombo for the fifth review of the 4-year extended fund facility supported program of the IMF with the Sri Lankan authorities. We had productive engagement in the past 2.5 weeks discussing recent macroeconomic developments and the progress in the implementation of Sri Lanka's economic reform program supported by the IMF. We met with a broad spectrum of stakeholders in the country, including the civil society, think tanks, and local governments. With respect to the outcome of the discussions, I am pleased to share with all of you that we have reached a staff-level agreement on the economic policies to conclude the fifth review of the program. I would like to highlight that the staff-level agreement is subject to the approval of IMF management and the IMF Executive Board in the months ahead.
IMF Mission Chief for Sri Lanka, Ivan Papageorgiou, also said that the economic reforms implemented by the Sri Lankan authorities have continued to support the recovery, with inflation progressing to target and real GDP growth and revenue mobilization outperforming expectations. Addressing the media personnel at the central bank premises this morning, he also commended that performance under the program has been strong.
Program performance has been strong. Revenue mobilization is performing strongly relative to the program target, primarily driven by taxes on motor vehicle imports. Gross official reserves reached $6.1 billion in September 2025, supported by the CBSL's steadfast and good performing FX purchases. Inflation has returned to positive territory since August, and the debt restructuring is nearly complete. Following the recent upgrade by S&P, all major credit rating agencies have now upgraded Sri Lanka away from the default status, and now the sovereign rating is reflecting the country's progress in restoring debt sustainability. Sri Lanka's ambitious reform agenda continues to deliver commendable outcomes, and the government's commitment to sustain reform momentum should safeguard Sri Lanka's macroeconomic stability against the global trade, policy uncertainty, and geopolitical tensions.
The International Monetary Fund further directed the Sri Lankan incumbent government to improve tax compliance, broaden the tax base, and tackle revenue leakages by strengthening the tax exemption frameworks. At the same time, he also asserted the importance of maintaining cost recovery energy pricing, strengthening the governance of state-owned enterprises, and resolving their legacy debts to ensure financial viability and minimize fiscal risks.
Looking ahead, it remains essential that the government continues revenue mobilization efforts and prudent budget execution. So to this end, the 2026 budget should be in line with program parameters. This requires sustained efforts to improve tax compliance, broaden the tax base, and strengthen the tax exemption frameworks. Cost recovery, electricity pricing, and SOE governance reforms remain key to contain fiscal risks. Importantly, now that macroeconomic stability has been restored, the government should embark on comprehensive structural reforms to unlock growth potential. Effective and efficient public-private partnerships, public procurement, and public investment management will improve the investment climate.
Stay tuned. We will return after the short commercial break. Welcome back after the break. The government has approved a new framework to institutionalize results-based management across all ministries and public institutions. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the proposal presented by the President in his capacity as the Finance Minister in Colombo recently.
ප්‍රතිඵලදායක කළමනාකරණය රාජ්‍ය අංශය තුළ ආයතනගත කිරීම වත්මන් රජයේ ප්‍රතිපත්තීන් සහ අභිමතාර්ථ පාදක කරගෙන රාජ්‍ය අංශය තුළ ප්‍රතිඵල පාදක කළමනාකරණය ආයතනගත කිරීම පිණිස මහා භාණ්ඩාගාරයේ ව්‍යාපෘති කළමනාකරණ හා අධීක්ෂණ දෙපාර්තමේන්තුව විසින් රේකී අමාත්‍යාංශ 22කට සහ ඒ යටතේ පවතින ආයතනවලට අදාළව 2025-2029 කාල සීමාව සඳහා අමාත්‍යාංශීය ප්‍රතිඵල රාමු මිනිස්ටීරියල් රිසල්ට්ස් ෆ්‍රේම්වර්ක් සකස් කරනු ලැබ තිබේ. සෑම අමාත්‍යාංශයකම දූරාවලියට අදාළ වගකීම් සමග අනුගත වෙමින් අදාළ විෂයපතය තුළ සංවර්ධන ඉලක්කයන් නියමිත කාල සීමාව තුළ සාක්ෂාත් කර ගැනීම එමගින් ජනතාව වෙත අපේක්ෂිත නිමැවුම් සහ ප්‍රතිලාභ ප්‍රමාදයකින් තොරව ලබා දීම සාතික කිරීම සහ ආර්ථික අංශයන් අතර සම්බන්ධතාවය ශක්තිමත් කිරීම.
Meanwhile, Fitch Ratings has maintained Sri Lanka's sovereign credit rating, citing both progress in reforms and persistent economic challenges. The CCC Plus affirmation was announced by the global rating agency recently.
In its latest assessment, Fitch Ratings affirmed Sri Lanka's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating at CCC Plus, noting that while substantial progress has been made under the International Monetary Fund program, the country still faces elevated government debt and a high interest burden. The agency highlighted that Sri Lanka's gross general government debt to GDP ratio is expected to reach about 96% by 2027, well above the median for similarly rated countries. However, Fitch also acknowledged positive developments, including sustained primary surpluses, rising revenues that grew 27% year-on-year in the first 7 months of 2025, and improved external finances with reserves standing at $6.2 billion. The rating agency warned that inability to sustain reforms or rebuild foreign exchange reserves could lead to negative rating action, while substantial decline in government debt ratio could eventually support an upgrade.
Sri Lanka's tourism sector is demonstrating a powerful recovery, attracting over 1.7 million international visitors so far this year. The latest arrival figures for September were released by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority recently.
The island nation welcomed 158,971 tourists in September alone, marking a significant 30.24% increase compared to the same month last year. This brings the total arrivals from January through September to 1,725,424 visitors. India has solidified its position as the top source market, contributing 375,292 tourists in the year to date and 49,697 visitors in September, accounting for nearly one-third of all arrivals last month. Other key markets showing strong performance include the United Kingdom, Russia, Germany and China, with the UK and Russia each surpassing 160,000 and 120,000 arrivals respectively for the year. Tourism officials attribute this consistent growth to renewed confidence among international travelers and anticipate a positive outlook for the industry's performance in the final quarter of 2025.
With that, we wind up for today. For this and more, subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. See you tomorrow with State of Business at 7:45 p.m. Take care and good night.